Oh, it got really quiet in here. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. We're going to talk a little bit today about Steve and my nephew and Kim and Dave's son, Sam. This is my husband, Steve Mielke. I'm Ruth Mielke. And this is Steve's brother, Dave, and his wife, Kim. They're the parents of Sam, and Sam is on the heart transplant list. He's 18 years old. And Kim and Dave are going to handle the story about Sam. I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about an organization we started working with because of Sam being on the heart transplant list. And it's an organization called COTA, and that stands for Children's Organ Transplant Association. And this is a really timely topic because there's a real need for organ donations. And I'm not sure why, but it seems like the number of organ donors have decreased lately. Kim and Dave said that even the numbers at Children's Hospital. Kim, what did you say? How many heart transplants did they do, like, say, 5 years ago on average? It was...
Dave knows those numbers better than I do.
Well, it was like 3 to 5. It was real small. And
Okay.
continually, it's increasing every year. It seems like they're doing more and more.
Okay. Children's organ donations in general, there's a huge need, both for living donors as well as signing your driver's license, so that in the event of an accident, your organs are available for donation. So what Children's Organ Transplant Association does is they help families like ours, they help train us on how to do fundraisers, how to raise money, because the out-of-pocket costs, even for Sam, whose parents are, well employed, he's taken care of, he's got insurance. The out-of-pocket cost for the surgery itself is $200,000 to $300,000, but the costs for insurance pre-treatment as well as post-treatment, can reach up to $1 million. So it's a really costly thing for Sam. It's going to continue whether he gets a perfect heart or not. He's going to have health issues that will follow him. So it's important that these kids have the money necessary to be put on the list, because the cold and hard truth is that if you can't, as a family, document that you've got the financial needs to cover out-of-pocket costs, you don't get on the transplant list. So COTA itself is a relatively small nonprofit that started in Bloomington, Illinois, around one child. And it started back in the 80s, and they came up with this model. And the model was to create a way so that the funds for these children, instead of going directly to a family, they would go to this nonprofit organization, making the donations anyone gives tax deductible, and also any bills that come through then go through COTA. So there's some fiduciary responsibility that COTA has to manage how the money's spent, make sure it's spent for the right things, and then hold the money in almost like a trust, or like a 529 plan for college, but this is more for medical expenses. And the nice thing about it is, you think about it, it's a really perfect model, because as kids are in the pipeline to get a transplant, all these families, the organization has grown, so now it's serving hundreds of families at any given point in time. One child might need the money today, another child might not need the money for 5 to 10 years, or maybe never need the money, God forbid, should they pass away. So from a cash flow standpoint, this organization makes the money available to kids as they need it. So right now, over the lifetime of COTA, they've helped over 2,000 children and adults. They also help adults with cystic fibrosis. They've raised more than $70 million, and they've had 1,400 patients successfully transplanted. They don't help with finding organs, but they just help with the money standpoint. So they've had, as of 2012 alone, just in 1 year, they had 140 patients receive transplants, and they raised more than $5 million. Every dollar that's raised, the nice thing about it too is every dollar goes to a child who needs a transplant. So none of the money goes for overhead costs. they really do run on a shoestring. They're very dedicated people. They traveled up here. I think Christy drove 5 hours to come up here and train us one night on what does this mean. And then I had a separate, I'm an accountant by day, but I had a separate PR training, and which is kind of a different world for me. But and then Steve is the webmaster, and he had separate training for that, for that as well. So they really do a nice job, and the way they fund their operations is on the interest, on the money that they collect. And they're a very stable organization. So I don't know if you're familiar with, there's a GuideStar, or there's an organization that rates nonprofits, and they give COTA a 5-star rating. I checked it out, and we were a little nervous, to be honest, when we first got involved with the organization, because I wanted to make sure we were working with a reputable group, and it made sense, because we thought if we want to raise money for Sam, why don't we raise money just for Sam? And then Kim and Dave would have it, and they'd be able to watch over it. We wouldn't have to go back and ask for the money back. But as I learned about COTA, I realized it's a fantastic model, and it's serving a broader purpose than just helping Sam. Let's see, where else did I want to cover that? Oh, and the other thing that's great about COTA is I did the due diligence from my own perspective as an accountant. I want to see their balance sheet, and they have a $23 million endowment. So they're definitely a financially stable organization, reputable and sound, and they were connected, I believe, to Kim and Dave through Children's Hospital. Yeah. So that COTA doesn't go out looking for families to say, please come and raise money for us. They work through social workers and through transplant centers at hospitals. And if you want more information on COTA, you can go to www.cota.org, and then we have our own separate website for SAM that's called cotaforsamm.com. There is information in the back table, and if you didn't see it, please feel free to grab the information on as you're leaving today. Okay. Yeah, and the thing about COTA is they're very transparent about their purpose. They don't say we're doing this, it's not a tax dodge or it's not a tax scheme, but they're clear that you're not guaranteed to get your money back, but should you be active in generating money for your child, they have never turned away an expense that's been submitted to be reimbursed. And then, again, the donations are in honor of Sam, it's not a directly guaranteed account for Sam. Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about why COTA exists and why organ donation is such an important thing. Right now, this isn't a children's, I'm sorry, this is not a very easy slide to read, but I just did a copy-paste from a website yesterday about organ donation statistics, and there's about 120,000 people right now waiting for organ transplants. And as of today, only about 80,000 of those people are eligible for various reasons. They might be too sick to receive a transplant at this time, or for other reasons not eligible. But for the first 6 months of this year, there were only 14,000 transplants actually done. And those 14,000 came from 7,000 people, which might seem kind of odd to you, but I'm assuming that means someone passes away, they donate their eyes, they donate their kidneys, they donate their heart, or it's living donations where someone is donating more than one type of organ or blood or whatever. So from that perspective, there's a huge need right now, and 77 people get an organ transplant every single day, but another 19 people pass away every day because they're on the list waiting and they don't receive a transplant. I think I covered this already. So organ donations are matched by this. By the way, this is all relatively new. The first organ transplant was done in the 50s. The first heart transplant was done in the 80s, and the organization that manages the national database and the registry of organ donations was just started in the 80s, and that was the first time it was done kind of on a national basis. So there's information on the back table about how to make sure you're registered. And I think probably all of us have that little orange sticker on our driver's license and think, okay, we're set, we're ready. But if you don't, I don't know if you guys have the new driver's license, but they come from California and they're that hard laminated plastic. And if your driver's license also isn't signed on the back, then you may slow things down. If something happens to you and you are in a position where your relatives would be deciding on donating organs, make sure the back of your driver's license is signed, not just the orange dot. You can also go on the registry on www.unos.org and just confirm that you're in the registry and that you're appropriately signed up. The other thing you can do as well is consider other options of donations, whether it's bone marrow or it is registering yourself for tissue or in a bigger way for a kidney option. This is just a high-level summary of the cost. I think I mentioned before that it's hundreds of thousands of dollars for a transplant, pretty much of any kind. A heart transplant, this statistic says $350. Is that consistent? Yeah.
It's a little bit low.
Okay. And again, like I said, hospitals will require that you show proof of payment before they're willing to put you on the list. And I'm not sure how Obamacare impacts this. I think there's a lot of questions outstanding about that. But again, there are additional resources. Just one last point on COTA. How does COTA help? COTA, like I said, they don't just give us training, but they also provide a lot of tools for us to use as far as running fundraisers. They have like a charity event in a box, that they hand to the family, which helps us a lot because we've never done anything like this in the past. This is just a listing of some of the other additional resources for learning about being a living donor or different organizations that manage and connect people who are in need of donations or helping you understand what it means and what the commitment would be if you would put yourself on a donor list.
We have some of that in the back.
Oh yeah, there's copies of this information in the back. Now I'm going to turn it over to Kim and Dave, and they're going to tell you guys a little bit about Sam's history and his background. While we're doing that, I'll put on a little slideshow with some pictures of Sam. I'm going to clip this on you. Okay, here, I'll do it.
Never had a mic on before.
There.
Well, I'm Kim Mielke. It's Dave. Thank you so much for coming today. We appreciate it. Sam was born on May 14th, 1995, on Mother's Day, 2 weeks early. And we were sent home with a 10-pound, happy, healthy baby. Well, for 6 weeks, we ended up with a screaming, non-sleeping, crying. They told me colic. He had a lot of colic. One of our appointments, one of the doctors noticed that his heart sounded a little funny, so they sent us over for EKG to the hospital. And that night, Dave was in the hospital. He ripped his, what's that?
Oh, Achilles tendon.
Yeah, his Achilles. So he just had surgery. So I took Sam to the hospital, and that night I got a call about 9 o'clock that said, your son's not going to live through the night. You need to get him into Children's Hospital. So we spent, 3 to 4 weeks in the hospital the first time. He was 6 weeks old, and he had a procedure that's called a ballooning procedure. And that was to keep him stable. And we found out he had a single ventricle transposition of the great arteries, which means he has a single pumping chamber, where we have the 4 chambers, so all of his blood was mixed. And then his aortic and ventricle were transposed, were backwards on the wrong sides. And it's very rare. It's less than 1% of the population would have such a heart. And so after his first surgery, it's a series of 3 surgeries normally to a corrective procedure. There is no cure for the surgery. There's nothing you can do. It's just a corrective to keep him living until he needs a transplant. And then he came home and he did so much better. And that one year, they went in for a procedure called a Glenn shunt. And we stayed about, I think, 6 weeks for that surgery. And then came home again, and at 3 years, he was ready for his third surgery, which is called the Fontan, which is the final procedure for this type of heart. And we were in there for 8 weeks that time. Sam always seemed to have a problem coming off the ventilator. When we were in the hospital, it took about one or 2 days and they were off the vent, and Sam was usually 3 to 4, and they ended up extubating himself, which they'd never seen a child do before. He did it both at 6 weeks and at a year. He took his vent out himself. He was ready to breathe, but every time they tried before that, he would stop breathing, and they'd have to rebag him and re-put the tubes back in. So we really had quite a normal life from age like 3 until 16. He did things they said he'd never be able to do. They said he probably would never ride a bike. He wouldn't be, running. He'd be really small, just developing his small-wise and physical development. Well, to this day, Sam is 6'4", and yeah, he outdid that. Very skinny, but anyways, when he was 16, they noticed his aortic valve was leaking, and he started getting real blue, and his saturation levels were getting really low, and which means he wasn't fusing through his fingers, his legs. It was more like from his elbows down, he was getting blue. His knees down were getting blue. His face, his lips are real dark. So they put in a mechanical valve at age 16, and so we were in the hospital about a week, for a week, and he was doing really well through that. And they had a temporary pacemaker in, and they found out that they had turned the pacemaker off. They had external pacemaker, that it wasn't, his chambers were not, his top and lower part of his heart were not connecting. So they had to go back in a week to the day of his transplant of his aortic valve. They put a permanent pacemaker in his tummy to help regulate his chambers pumping. And then we went home. It was 3 weeks, so it was a relatively short for our stays at the hospital. We were 16, and he was doing pretty well, but his saturations never came back. He was always in the low 70s, which makes him pretty blue and gets him very tired and more weak. So then they did catheterization on him to check, and it turned out their hope and plan of having the aortic valve to help the actual function of the heart, recoup and come along. It turns out the function never improved and is getting worse. So the actual heart itself is dying now. And so we ran all these different tests, and we met with Transplant, the transplant team at Children's Hospital, and they said that we need to list him. And by listing him before he turns 18 would give him a priority over an adult list. So we listed him in February of 2013, and I guess we just wait. We were hoping and praying that he gets hard soon. He's actually doing quite well. He is at UW Whitewater. He had to stay within 2 hours of the hospital, because you have to be to the hospital when you get a call. We carry a pager with us, and when those pagers go off, we have to be in the hospital within 2 hours. So Sam, he went to Whitewater to be within 2 hours of the hospital. And if you look at him, he's great. He looks great. Maybe to some of you wouldn't notice it, but he's very blue. His lips are always real dark, and his face is blue. But he's a very oh my God, the kid is unbelievable. He's happy. He doesn't walk around feeling sorry for himself ever. He's got a great group of friends. Very supportive people. He's happy. He's smart. He missing 6 to 8 weeks of school his junior year. He still ended up sorry.
Yeah, that's just it. I think he's networked in with great family and great friends. He's got a lot of guidance, and we're really optimistic about it. And I think with this association with COTA, I think Ruth had pointed out to me, it's mostly it comes down to a legacy issue as well. So it's not just a contribution for Sam, but there are a lot of kids that need a lot of help. And I think in the long run, regardless of the money that's raised, it all goes to needy kids. You know, we're really optimistic about where he's going, but if things don't work out for him, you know it's going to some kids that really need some help.
Does anybody have any questions for us? I mean, it's been, you know...
I'm hyper emotional, by the way, so I get a little choked up every time I talk about it, and it's really hard for me to do that. But I appreciate everybody coming in here to find out more about it.
If something would happen to somebody like in their 50s with a heart that age, would that give him a shorter lifespan if he would have a transplant with a heart that would be that old? Would that heart live like a 50-year-old person's heart?
That's just it. I mean, it comes down to
health of the heart.
The health of the heart. The longevity of the situation is, you know, regardless of what heart he gets, there's a duration and a usefulness to that organ. It only lasts so long.
He will need multiple.
And inevitably, it gets to a point with his age where he'll need a second heart. And likewise with anybody that receives a heart, it only lasts so long, and you got to have another one. So that's primarily too, when you start thinking long term with anybody with this type of situation, is you got to kind of pre-plan for financial things and things of where they're going to be down the road.
That's kind of what we're more looking for Sam, is his neck surgeries or his next, because he'll be obviously on our insurance after he turns 16, and he'll need help. I mean, what employer would employ somebody knowing, well, he's going to need a transplant, you know, he's going to be on our insurance? Is that the chance of him ever getting health insurance are very, very limited. And you know, if Sam will get sick, because your immune system is so shot after, and even now, I mean, he doesn't have much of an immune system, but after the transplant, you don't have much of an immune system, and if he gets sick, he most likely will end up in the hospital for recovery for a normal everyday illness. And he's 26 years old, he has an apartment, he has a job. Who's going to take care of this for him? This is where COTA would be able to help him. They would help with his medical expenses, and if he's in the hospital, they'll take care of his mortgage, you know, help him, or not mortgage, rent, or, you know, it's to help sustain these kids who don't have anything, don't have insurance, don't have, you know, you know.
From my own perspective, I mean, that's what I've seen too. At Children's Hospital, I've seen an awful lot of kids that don't have anybody, and they're out there on their own, and there's no support network for them. They're isolated, and there's nobody there, like a family member or an organization to help them. They've got to try and do it on their own, and it's a heck of a mountain for somebody that young to have to go through. And they shouldn't have to go through it alone.
Yeah, I guess I have three questions. One, I thank God that you are in the midst of that hospital, not only for your son, but for a lot of children. I think God has put you there, and you have a heart that really speaks. Number two, would he go on a heart pump if he went into heart failure?
Well, see, that's, right now he's healthy, so the ideal situation for him right now is to get this heart sewn. Right. Because the better chances of survival, there's a lot of rejection with heart transplants. And
right.
That would be the next step, though.
Yes.
If it fails,
if he starts getting sicker,
he gets an assist.
And number three, I realize with the mechanical heart, issues of blood clots and so forth, is there hopes, as there was with the Jarvik heart 25, 30 years ago? You know, you just don't hear that today. Is there hope for a mechanical heart out there?
Yes.
There's a lot of, there's growing hearts too.
Okay.
Yeah, there's
growing hearts is the big thing now.
Yeah, actually cultivating them, or, you know, that type of thing, but that's not really done domestically.
Gotcha.
Under the new health care plan, isn't he allowed to stay on your insurance till age 25?
26.
26? So
yes.
I think you misspoke, but you said 16, but you meant.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's
Yeah.
16. Yeah, I'm sorry, it's 26.
And he, under the new plan, he won't be denied insurance because of a pre-existing condition, will he?
Well, nobody really understands the new health thing. I don't really know how that, they say that, but I was told at Children's that we have a lot of, there's a lot of reps that we meet with at Children's. We social workers, psychologists,
There's not a lot of clarity on that.
Yeah, we're not
Meaning that,
100%.
you're not 100% certain that you'll be able to maintain his current insurance pattern, or where we're going right now with it. And it's kind of, it's not really defined as where he would be under Obamacare, meaning, is he going to have the same surgery? Is he going to have the same doctor? Is he going to have the same care schedule? All those things are pretty obscure. I mean, it's not really defined.
The one thing about Children's Hospital is when we found out about Sam's heart, there was only 2 surgeons in the country that ever worked on a heart such as Sam's, and one of them was at Children's Hospital of Wisconsin.
Wow.
So it was.
I think the gentleman on the first row really made the issue. And it's not just exclusively heart. I mean, as we go to Children's Hospital again and again, you see kids with neurological conditions, you see kids with kidney conditions,
Cancer.
Yeah, cancers. You can't describe what they're going through. And I think it just behooves everybody to get involved a little bit more with an organization that's inevitably going to help everybody. And if you're in a position where there's question marks with healthcare and insurance and everything else, this is a proactive measure you can take, right, to help kids in a financial situation that they'll never be able to get out of. And it's not saying one's different than the other, because it gets distributed to all kids, all of them that are involved with the organization. And I think that's the important thing to it.
I was just going to add, with the insurance, even if you're fortunate enough to have good insurance, there's usually a cap on an individual, how much that insurance will pay out in a lifetime.
Well, there's
children in situations like Sam's and others hit that cap really fast.
The lifetime cap is no longer allowed under Obamacare.
Hopefully that will continue on, because
Right.
so it's organizations like this that help out in those situations. So if that's no longer allowed, that would also be a blessing as well. But, so I'm just saying that to have someone sit there and have, if you're thinking of organ donation and thinking it's going to people who maybe didn't take good care of themselves and are now asking for a transplant, these are kids that, didn't choose to be in this situation. So to not be able to do it just for a financial reason would be completely devastating. And it is truly expensive, not just the surgery, but it's the aftercare, the anti-rejection medication.
He'll be 17, he'll be on when he's, to start with. Takes 13 pills a day now. But yes, you're right, he would be anti-rejection medication, and it's very specific how he has to take it too. And they say take it at 8 in the morning, 8 at night. He takes it at 8 in the morning, 8 at night. Otherwise rejection starts setting in for him. So there's, it's a lot of aftercare and a lot of, they do a lot of catheterizations afterwards. They take a lot of biopsies and see how the new heart is actually working. So it's a lot of, they said especially the first 3 months after he gets the transplant, he'll be there almost weekly for different testings. And so.
I have 2 questions, both associated with the organization COTA. Number 1, I noticed it's headquartered in Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
Does COTA primarily provide assistance just in the Midwest, or is it throughout the entire U.S.?
No, it's throughout the entire U.S.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they have, it's over 100 campaigns, but they have, so it's really amazing, because if they have 150 campaigns going on, each campaign has like a support group like ours, which is about 15, I think we have 15 or 20 people on our committee. So that's like thousands of people across the country doing their own little kind of grassroots fundraisers.
Okay. And my second question is, you mentioned the costs associated with these surgeries and the hospitals requiring the proof to be able to afford those. Is that where COTA steps in with family and says, we will finance this certain amount to assist in paying for that procedure, or?
I think my guess, Gordon, is what happened is that when you go, the hospital meets with you, they say, here's an organization that will help you. And I think if you sign up with COTA, my guess is that helps your business case for saying, we've got the financial support, that, I don't, because COTA isn't gonna, they're not gonna fund, if you don't raise a dime for COTA, my guess is you're probably not gonna get reimbursed much, if anything, from them for, but if you show effort and show that you're trying to raise money for your child's cause, my guess is that helps the hospital get some comfort that, there's security there, they're gonna get paid. Do you guys, anything I'm saying?
No, I think I would agree with that 100%, and that's how it was directed to us when we first got involved with it.
No, we have insurance for him now. I mean, we do have insurance. We're more concerned about his future.
Yeah, there's plenty of people though that do not. And you don't know where you're going to be, 5-10 years from now. Things change, and especially now. I think there's a lot of question marks out there and a lot of things that are going to change in the future. And I think there's going to be a greater need for organizations like this in the future. I really do.
So what are your fundraising efforts?
Ruth, you want to?
Sure.
We have some fabulous people. If you guys know Steve and Ruth, they've just been, I don't know what I'd do without my family.
Well, that's been part of the biggest benefit, I think, of COTA has been that it's brought our family together. Not that we weren't together before, but when you have a nephew who needs a heart transplant, it's not an easy thing to sit down with him and say, so how you feeling today, Sam? Because he's probably never feeling good. And this is our first chance to actually talk to Sam, and he comes to all of our fundraisers, and he's really engaged. He's an amazing child. But the fundraisers we've done, we did a Glow Golf event at Hanson Park. We did a Packer party down at Palermo's where we just, got together for the 49ers game, and then had, kind of auction items. Our next event is in Burlington on October 12th, where we're having oddly enough, a chiropractor event. The people that are connected with the family, Kim's mom, her chiropractor in Burlington, and Kim grew up in Burlington, they wanted to do a fundraiser for us. So it's going to be out in his parking lot, and they're going to do free adjustments and massages, and then we're going to have auction items, and Steve and I are going to serve
What to do it?
So it's through little little events, and we've got a couple bigger things planned coming up. We've got a Facebook site, and then the COTA for Sam website that will announce all the events, but that's what we're doing.
And do you do any co-work with Children's Hospital in their fundraising development department at all, or not?
Not yet.
We do independently. We work with Children's Hospital and do some things.
We're thinking about doing something. That's one of our bigger events planned. But to be honest, COTA discourages us from combining with other nonprofits or even from other COTA campaigns because they said it kind of confuses the fundraising efforts. But in my mind, why not? Why wouldn't we kind of get the groundswell of support? And Children's Hospital has such a huge fundraising effort and system in place that if we tied into it, I think it could only be a good thing, especially because we are so lucky to have that resource here in the city. So there's Steve and Dave's sister knows someone who is in a fundraising position at Children's Hospital. So she's thinking about reaching out to them to do kind of like a holiday showcase event where you go like the symphony does, where you tour a home. And so we were thinking about doing something along those lines.
Yeah, I know one thing we haven't talked about. I've had the privilege of working with families at the time of trauma of harvesting hearts in emergency units, and we as a people and as Christians don't talk much about this in terms of what would happen if something happened to someone that we love and we know. Because I know how difficult it is when people are in trauma to make that decision.
Right.
But if you've done some thinking about it faith-wise prior to a tragic death in your family or something, and we don't talk much about that as Christians, and I think we need to work at what we can do to have more hearts available.
That's really interesting, Carl, because I did a little bit of reading, but it sounds like there's a way, sometimes the families can even be connected. Is there a way like that you might even know who donated an organ, or is that not possible?
Well, it's been a number of years since I was involved. I spent time at St. Luke's Hospital on the heart units. And at that time you could make connections, and there was a very concerted effort, but only at that point when people came in and there were so many conflicting voices that were coming at the families at that time. Too much, I can't make a decision.
Yeah.
And they would use chaplains many times to just be a faith basis for helping them make those choices if they've lost a child in an accident or what have you. But we just don't talk much about it in our extended networks. People we know. And,
That's true.
You talk about the license, the driver's license, which is good, but it's still something that we don't talk about.
I haven't found a faith that's resistant to it.
No.
You know what I mean? It's not like you can say that there's one specific religion that says, well, we're not going to get involved in any way with that. It's
Well, it's
something
come
that
a long
everyone gets
way.
behind, but like you're saying, there's
It's
just
come a
not-
long way. In Roman Catholic hospitals, you weren't allowed to talk about some of that stuff with their notion of the body. But it's changed, thank God.
Yes.
When you were talking about the driver's license and that orange sticker, I wasn't quite sure what else other than that sticker should we have.
Well, it's good if you sign the back of the driver's license, even if you have the sticker,
Yeah.
and you have to use sounds silly, but you have to use like a Sharpie, because you can't
Right.
use a ballpoint pen on that waxy surface.
see.
So that helps with organ donations in the event that you're in a tragic situation. But there are other things to do if you want to be a living donor, whether it's
Right.
stem cell, bone marrow,
Yeah.
that type of thing. And there are separate registries for that. It's separate websites. So it's still, I think, a national registry for those things, but it's not like you can go and say, I'm willing to be a donor. Yeah, there's a little piece of paper that has website links, but there's also I didn't make too many of them because they're 20 pages long, but the uniform, UNOS, getting it wrong. I don't know what UNOS stands for now, I'm forgetting it, but UNOS is the national organization that covers all organ donation, and they have the links in there of how you can get access to the different websites.
Well, as far as licensing is concerned too, it's not just when your license comes due or it's going to lapse and you renew. You can actually do that at any time. So it's not just time specific on like reissuing licenses.
Does COTA get any government funding?
I don't believe so.
No, it's
I think it's all
independently
private.
done.
Have they been able to clarify? I just know from years ago when I was involved in this, hospital centers were fighting for hearts, and it had to do with jurisdiction, Is there a clearinghouse now that if someone dies in Milwaukee, it doesn't go to Texas,
Well, it's a national registry, so
So they've got that clear now.
Yes.
yeah.
They have if you, Carl, it'd probably be good if you grab the packet back there, because there's like a board, like a national board that is available 24 hours a day,
Right.
365 days a year, and they make the call and they decide, and they said, like if a heart becomes available in Texas, it sounds like it would first probably go to somebody in Texas just because there's so much to do with the timeliness of getting the organ to
Exactly,
the recipient. But they said then if there's a perfect match in Wisconsin, like if it's Sam, then they would make that call to say, is it more important to get it to someone close or get it to the person who's going to be the better match?
Right. Years ago, they were working hard to put that in place, so it's good.
It was a federal government law that passed to put that national registry in place. It's an amazing thing, and I guess it was put in place so there would be less likelihood people could sell organs for profit.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But it's all relatively new, really, because it was late 80s when they established it. But
That's when I was in the hospital doing that stuff.
Okay, it must have been a mess then. Any other questions?
So what is the medical practice of a child, a minor, is,
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
do you know what the medical practice is if a minor is in an accident and is not going to live? Do physicians automatically assess the viability of the organs and talk to the parents, the guardians?
I'm not sure how that works, but I think it's primarily done on consent, where they approach the parents or have some type of pre-plan there.
Do you know if it's pretty like standard in medical practice that physicians are always on, sort of required to do this? Or do a lot of organs get lost because the parents are never approached?
I'm not sure what the percentage is on that. And, I know that occurs though. Absolutely.
Law enforcement and emergency rooms trained is such a key thing for so much of that hurt.
I would think so, yeah.
I thought one interesting thing that you guys shared with us, that if a child's heart became available for Sam, he's too large for a child's heart. I thought it was interesting that the organ won't grow when it's transplanted. Maybe that's obvious to you guys, but I hadn't really thought about it. I thought if it was living and in someone's body, it would grow.
Sam needs an adult heart.
Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.